storm had raged for a full day, and there was no way of knowing how long it would continue. The lightkeeper at the Huron Island Lighthouse spent Sunday, September 3rd, 1905, working to maintain his critical light. Just after 4 o'clock, he looked out at Lake Superior to watch the roiling nor'easter. As he watched the massive waves crash over the rocks below, he noticed something emerge from the torrential rain. It was a large wooden schooner, the type that by 1905 would usually be towed by a larger freighter. But this schooner was alone. Her jib and foresail were set as she fought her way through the storm, no doubt hoping to find a protected inlet at one of the nearby islands. She was already dangerously waterlogged, and wave after wave broke over her deck, ripping the helpless ship apart. Her crew was facing a losing battle, but there was nothing the lightkeeper could do. As the wind howled outside, he watched as the schooner slowly and agonizingly slip beneath the waves of Lake Superior. At Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario, there's a short rugged trail that leads to a cliff face called Agawa Rock, near the mouth of the Agawa River. On the rock there are a series of pictographs drawn by the Ojibwe people, some 150 to 400 years ago. The images are believed to depict Mishipeshu, or the Great Lynx, a mythical underwater panther with the head and paws of a giant cat and a body covered in scales with sharp spikes lining its back and tail. These beliefs are intricate and varied widely across different indigenous groups, but generally the Mishipeshu was said to be a powerful creature that lived in the deepest depths of the lake. They balanced out the power of the thunderbirds in the sky. They could be good and helpful, but they could also summon storms and create death and misfortune. These creatures were a force to be respected and honored in order to safely traverse the Great Lakes. Stories of a great sea monster lurking in Lake Superior persisted long after the Ojibwe people were forced out of their land by the Canadian and American governments. As commercial shipping proliferated across the lakes, stories of sea monsters gave way to tales of cursed vessels and ghost ships. These superstitions tried to explain the countless ships and men that seemed to vanish without a trace all over the lakes every season. But the truth was less comforting than a simple ghost story. On Thursday, August 31st, 1905, final preparations were being made on the wooden-hulled freighter Iosco and a schooner, the Olive Jeanette, that she would tow on her voyage down the lakes to Cleveland, Ohio. The two ships were heavily laden with iron ore. As the cargo was trimmed and the hatch covers were secured, the air buzzed with a coming storm. Flags were already whipping in the wind and whitecaps were building out on the water. A storm was building. But for Captain Nelson Gagne of the Iosco and Captain Frank McGreevy of the Olive Jeanette, there was no question that they would soon be underway. If conditions worsened, they would seek shelter. But for now, their vessels could manage, and that meant that a delay was out of the question. So at noon, the two ships set out on Lake Superior to begin their voyage. The Iosco was a typical wooden-hulled freighter that in 1905 was still incredibly common on the lakes. Labeled Hull Number 80, she was built in 1891 by the West Bay Shipping Company in Bay City, Michigan. Named after Iosco County, Michigan, she was one of 6 nearly identical freighters. Built from solid white oak, she measured 312 feet or 95 meters in length with a beam of 41 feet or 12 meters and came in at 2,051.8 gross registered tons. These were some of the largest wooden-hulled freighters ever built. Her enormous size required several steel arches, keel reinforcements, cross bracing, and numerous steel plates embedded into her hull to increase her strength. She was powered by a 3-cylinder triple expansion steam engine built by the Frontier Engine Works Company in Detroit, Michigan. Fed by 2 Scotch Marine boilers, her engine could produce 1,000 horsepower. The Iosco was launched on April 25, 1891, and entered service less than a month later on May 11th. The freighter enjoyed a relatively uneventful career. In 1897, she was caught in a violent November gale near the Apostle Islands. After sheltering for almost a full day, she was forced to make a dash for the safety of Duluth. Wave after wave smashed over her bow, and ice began to collect on her decks, pushing the ship dangerously low. But her buoyant wooden hull helped her ride through the storm. She finally arrived in Duluth with around 150 tons of ice coating her decks and superstructure. It was said that she looked more like an ice sculpture than a ship. Nonetheless, she performed exceptionally well. Storm-tested, the Iosco earned her reputation as a sturdy and reliable vessel. By the final day of August 1905, there was little reason for Captain Gonya and his crew of 19 to doubt the integrity of their ship as they sailed into the building storm. Throughout the rest of the day, despite the growing wind and waves, the Iosco and the Olive Jeanette, towed close behind, seemed to be faring well. But the storm was only just beginning. For decades, it was extremely common for freighters to tow other ships behind them to maximize the cargo carried on each voyage. But as steel freighters got larger and more capable of carrying significantly larger loads, this practice eventually fell out of favor. In 1905, however, many freighters were paired with a tow ship. As she fought her way across Lake Superior, the Iosco was paired with the Olive Jeanette. Built only 1 year before the Iosco in 1890, the Olive Jeanette was a part of the last generation of Great Lakes schooners. Constructed at the same shipyard as the Iosco, the 4-masted schooner came in at 1,371 tons and measured 242 feet or 73.76 meters in length with a beam of 39 feet or 11.9 meters. She was named after the daughters of Charles J. Smith, one of the ship's owners. Some believe that the Olive Jeanette was cursed. They might have had good reason to think that. On October 25, 1898, the 312-foot steamer L.R. Doty had just departed Chicago with a load of corn and the Olive Jeanette in tow. They were quickly overtaken by a massive gale with winds reaching 70 miles per hour. In the chaos, the two ships became separated. The crew of the Jeanette fought to keep their schooner afloat, while the Doty vanished into the maelstrom. She was never seen again. Her crew of 17 were lost in the storm. Her wreck wasn't discovered until 2010, laying intact at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Incredibly, the Olive Jeanette survived the storm, but the tragedy of her lost companion haunted the schooner for the rest of her career. No one could forget the image of the ill-fated Doty vanishing into the storm, so the Olive Jeanette became something of a hoodoo ship. But superstition is hardly a reason to abandon a perfectly capable vessel, and the schooner would be paired with numerous other tow ships in the coming years. In 1905, she was paired with the Iosco, one of the L.R. Doty's sister ships. Captained by Frank McGreevy and operated by a crew of 7, the Olive Jeanette set out with the Iosco on the last day of August 1905, expecting a rough voyage. But they knew all too well what the Jeanette had been through, and they were confident that they would be through the worst of it soon. For the first day, the two ships fared well, and it looked as if they would potentially make it to the Sioux before the worst of the coming storm could bear down on Lake Superior. But by the evening of Friday, September 1st, their luck ran out, as a brutal nor'easter swept in. Soon the two ships were fighting for their lives. Without any wireless equipment, they were completely on their own. The storm continued to rage throughout the day on Saturday, September 2nd. That morning, Captain Massey of the 424-foot steel-hulled freighter Mullen spotted the two ships 20 miles east of the Huron Islands, probably seeking shelter from the storm. But they seemed to be faring well, and Captain Massey paid them little attention as he focused on guiding his ship through the storm. He was the last person to ever see the Iosco. Just after 4 p.m. at the Huron Island Lighthouse, the keeper spotted the Olive Jeanette in her final moments. The Iosco was nowhere to be seen. While the lightkeeper was unable to do anything to save them, it was clear that the ship's crew had given it their all. But the Jeanette's luck finally ran out, and the schooner disappeared in the churning waves of Lake Superior. As the wind died down and the storm dissipated, hope persisted that the Iosco and the Olive Jeanette would soon arrive at the Sioux. It was common, especially in those days, for ships to run behind schedule after a storm. Usually when heavy weather blew in, ships would find shelter and wait it out. When Captain Mullen reported seeing the two ships near the Huron Islands, it seemed that they did exactly that. But then, word came in that the steamer Juanita sailed through a debris field late in the day on Sunday, September 3rd, in Keweenaw Bay, near the Keweenaw Waterway lower entry, just as the storm was finally starting to let up. Since conditions were still rough, it was impossible for the crew of the Juanita to pick up or identify any of the debris, but it was enough to leave little doubt that a large ship had foundered in the area. Soon after, debris began washing ashore. Bulwarks, hatches, shattered fragments of cabins and masts, a yawl boat, and numerous other fragments littered the beaches of the Keweenaw Bay. As searchers picked through the debris, it came across oars and furniture bearing the name Olive. It was all but certain that the Olive Jeanette and the 7 on board had met a tragic end. This was confirmed on Tuesday, September 5th, when a tug called the Hebbard made a stop at the Huron Island Light while searching for the missing ship. That was when the outside world finally learned what the isolated lightkeeper saw 2 days before. For a brief moment, there was hope that the Iosco might have survived the storm. But soon, debris that could have only come from a large wooden freighter began washing ashore. With no other signs of the ship or her crew, it was clear that both ships, as well as the 26 people on board, were lost to Lake Superior. In the days that followed, people began finding bodies. Members of the Huron Mountain Club found most of them on the shores of the Keweenaw Bay. A member recounted his experience in the Daily Mining Journal a few days later. One of the most horrible sights I ever witnessed was when I found the body of a woman and one of the men Tuesday afternoon. They were about 3/4 of a mile apart, the woman being under a number of saw logs. In her hand was clutched a handful of hair, evidently torn from her head while in the throes of death. Her body was bruised and cut by floating timbers and logs, although the features were not distorted, and I think could be easily identified by those who knew her in life. Yet her appearance was appalling, and a sight no person could easily forget. There seems to be no doubt that one of the men found on the beach reached the shore alive, but died soon from exposure and exhaustion. His body was laying well up on the beach, and on the saw logs was a trail of blood, showing plainly the course he traveled to reach the spot where he finally gave up the ghost. Dr. Stockwell, also one of the search party, gave the opinion the man reached the shore alive, but could not survive the shock. The woman was probably Mrs. W.B. Barnes, who worked as an assistant steward alongside her husband on the Iosco. Later, the body of Captain McGreevy of the Olive Jeanette was found tied to a broken spar. It was perhaps a last-minute effort to save himself. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure that somebody would find his body. In all, only 16 bodies of the 26 lost were ever recovered. With no survivors, the question of what went wrong that night remained unanswered. Some believe that the two ships were far too heavily loaded for the conditions. The storm was a particularly brutal one for the end of summer, and the ships were probably not secured as tightly as they would have been for a run later in the season. Others speculate that the two ships might have collided with one another in the chaos before separating, possibly dooming the Iosco first, soon followed by the Olive Jeanette, as witnessed by the Huron Island lightkeeper. Others question the integrity of the Iosco. She was not the first or the last of her sisters to founder on the lakes. In addition to the L.R. Doty, another identical sister, the Uganda, was lost near the White Shoal Light on Lake Michigan after her hull was damaged by ice in April 1913. As the years passed, the tragedy of the two ships eventually faded from memory. In the 1990s, the wreck of the Olive Jeanette was discovered in 300 feet of water, 8 miles off the Huron Islands. But the wreck of the Iosco has never been found. She remains one of the countless victims of Lake Superior. A reminder that try as we might, we will never fully understand the awesome power of the lakes or the mysteries that lay in the depths. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.